I'm Mark Howell, I'm the clerk of the select board, also member of the MCI Concord Advisory Board. And we're meeting this evening, it's June 24th. And it's 6 p.m. and we'll just quickly go through a roll call because we want to know who's here. So Scott Bates. Yeah. John Boyden. Here. Eric Custer.
Here.
Or Aaron. Dan Gainsborough, I know is absent. We hear Peter Lowitt. Here. Great to see you. Patrick McCurdy. There. Linda Miller.
Here.
Elizabeth Akers-Moore. And let's see. All right. No. Okay. And Emily Rupp.
Here.
And Lee Smith.
Here.
Great. Okay. Just a couple of announcements from me to get going. We need a clerk for the meeting. Thank you, John, for getting us minutes ready. We have a volunteer to review tonight's minutes, which will be largely taken by Shannon. Thank you again. We'll pass it around.
Okay, oh, that's
Did
great.
such a good job.
Right.
Yeah. All right.
I will say, yeah.
Okay. So, only will.
We have the opportunity to discuss whether she's qualified or.
We'll see. No need to compete over it. So just one announcement from the select board. Mary and I, after some consultation, did elect to choose a co-chairs model for this committee, and what we appointed at the last select board meeting was Patrick McCurdy and Dan Gainsborough to serve as co-chairs, and Patrick and Dan have agreed. So as soon as I'm done with the announcements, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick to kind of lead us through the rest of the agenda tonight. But just quickly, we have made some communications. There's a reminder for all of us. We have made some communications updates to the webpage, the MCI Concord Advisory Board at concordma.gov is our committee page. There you'll find the members, the charge, the expected date for upcoming meetings, as well as the meeting packet for tonight, linked at the bottom, which is the June 24th meeting. We are hoping to, I got some feedback from the public after our last meeting, and what the real request was to have a little bit more information about all of us and how we came to be part of this board. And we kind of skipped over that at the first meeting because we had already had some opportunity to meet each other. But what I'd like to request is that everybody send just a couple of sentence bio to Shannon. And she'll augment the committee webpage with background information that's relevant to how you came to be serving on this committee and what your expertise have been. And that's in service of that. Also, we have put 10 cards out, which just turn back in at the end, and so that as the camera picks you up, hopefully your name is also displayed and people know who's speaking, so that we can move through things that way. The email contact has now been set up. It's MCI Concord board at concordma.gov for people in the public to send us their thoughts, their suggestions, their questions. So that link will also be shortly appearing on our committee page. Oh, is it? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, it is. Under contact us on the right. Probably be sharing this stuff now. But so that's a board email. I think when at our last meeting, we talked a little bit about the rapid response. That is a little bit difficult from an open meeting perspective. So I think what we're going to do is ask for a volunteer to be a communications focal point who will get that email. They'll also go to Shannon and they can be distributed out to the general board to try to avoid open meeting, but we can talk about that a little bit more. And the last thing I had was the future meetings are going to move to noon time on Mondays. The next one will be July 8th, July 22nd, and August 5th. So every other week on Monday at noon. Having said all of that, the next item on the agenda would be the approval of the June 10th minutes. I know that John had made a couple of updates and they were distributed this afternoon and were pretty minor. Anybody else?
Just gonna make a motion to approve the minutes.
Great. Second. All right. And,
Mark, hi, sorry, just making sure you could hear me. It's Elizabeth Akers-Moore.
oh, great. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Yes. Hi, just tell you I'm here. Thanks.
Given that we're hybrid, we'll take a roll call vote on the minutes. And I'll just call it off as it's listed on the webpage because it's easy for me to remember. Yes. John Boyd.
Aye.
Aaron Fisker. And not here. Mark. Aye. Peter Road. Aye. Patrick. Aye. Linda Miller.
Yes.
Elizabeth.
Was that me? Aye.
Great. And Emily.
Yes.
And Lee.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. So we're here.
All right, next item on the agenda is a town staff update. Megan. Thanks, Megan.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ludo,
Maybe-
Deputy Town Manager. Okay. Thanks. Nice to see everybody. I have a pretty brief update today. I know there's some folks that will have a lot of helpful updates, so I'm looking forward to sharing some of my time with them. I just wanted to share that we are at the staff level and with members of the select board having regular meetings with DCAM just about every other week. We are starting to explore an update to the West Concord master plan and identify funding. I mentioned that at the last meeting, but we're starting to zoom in and think about a scope and try to understand how some of that could be funded. And the main thing I wanted to talk about with you all and kind of get your thoughts on is there's an amendment for the legislation put together with Representative Cataldo and then the Senate with Senator Barrett that could lead to funds for this project. I think we talked about that a little bit last time. And we are working with DCAM to understand all of the jobs that need to be done and think about a strategic way we can all partner to understand the site and understand you know, what needs to be done before we get towards the next stage in planning for this really exciting opportunity. And the funds could be available if it goes through. They could be identified in August and then available in November. So I think we're at a point where I'd really like to use all the expertise at this table and in this community to kind of start to think about what are all the things that we're hoping to get done and how to best use any funds that may become available through this legislative process. So this is looking at site conditions. Some of this is going to be done by DCAM or you know, with other agencies, but just kind of getting them on the table. So site conditions, market analysis, historic property inventory and work. I just, you know, are thinking about how to best brainstorm all of these elements that we want to make sure we're covering. And then using the funds so that we're really moving the needle forward and chipping away, getting all the information that is needed for Concord and Commonwealth and really working together collaboratively. So my update is a little bit more kicking in over to you. It doesn't have to be done today, but I'm just starting to think about all the things that need to be done and how to start carving them out.
Question about the funding, is that intended for the year or is that for the duration of this project, or is there a period of time for which is available?
So my understanding is that it does have a shelf life. It needs to be spent by the end of the fiscal year. But I do have a call into the Department of Economic Development this will be my first time accepting an earmark like this, or, you know, working to facilitate an earmark like this, and so. I'm just, I mean, I think the preference would probably be to. Be able to utilize the funds for a longer period, but my understanding is I think that it's usually pretty tight and needs to be expended. And Representative Capaldo is here and can talk about his experience as well.
Just a question following up from last meeting. I think there was a meeting with Weston and Sampson that you said was taking place, and I wondered, one, how that went, what was the result, and then also with that consulting, because you know, is there a consulting project actually there, and would that take up some of the funds? And should we be thinking about the wastewater treatment sewer as well?
Yes, we should be. That's a good question. And I think we had Alan Cathcart the last meeting, and it might make sense to have a little bit more of a focused conversation at a future meeting on an agenda item. I think that was I don't have a full update on that. It's pretty technical. I think it was just still kind of site visit, getting the lay of the land. It's part of a wider scope looking at our wastewater capacity in Concord. And I think the funding mechanism is through the enterprise funds, but is there a possibility to do a deeper dive using these funds? I think there may be, and so I think that's a really.
Can I add to that? So, just in my opinion, I think the wastewater treatment plant is hugely important, just not only for this site, but for the town's development in general. So we're, depending on who you ask, kind of approaching the limits of what we've got for capacity for future development anywhere. So that's able to be expanded or improved or something. It benefits the entire town in theory, so that should, I think, be on the table as.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that, I mean, I think that we're so excited to see that called out specifically by the administration, because we've talked about how close we are and really at capacity, and you know, there are tough decisions that had to be made regarding economic vitality in Concord. You know, there's some projects we can't say yes to right now, and that's really difficult when we have people that want to, you know, start a brewery or, you know, do things that are water intensive, and we don't have it. And so that's a really good point.
That could also be one of the most expensive elements of the kind of studies that we do.
Yeah.
Yes, I was just curious, you know, obviously. DCAM has done this many times before, so they must have a list, you know, order of what you need to do in terms of engaging certain consultants. Phase one, all the different consultants have to come on board, and then there's things that we need to do as the town of Concord. Have you figured out, are you talking to DCAM about what they're gonna be able to do, what they're gonna be able to fund, and what is gonna be in the bucket for the 200 or 400?
We are talking, yes, we're talking to DCAM, and we have the commissioner here, so we can maybe follow up this more specific questions about what scopes are being developed right now, and the focus at this point, it's still under the control of the Department of Corrections, and so they're looking at engineering scopes for the existing facilities. And but as for budget and kind of who's doing what, I'd say that still needs to be worked out. I think that's where we are right now. And if there's funding that may be available for the town of Concord to look at this, but we also know that there are things that need to get done for everyone to have a better understanding of the site, like how can we collaborate? Because we're trying to work towards the same goal of.
But if we had a comprehensive list of
Right.
all the things, then you could talk to DCAM about. You could do this, you could do that.
Right, yeah, no, that makes sense.
I get a lot of questions from people around town about where's MCI fitting in with 2229 Main Street and other available properties in town. And that sort of says there's a broader question in terms of town master plan and So please tell me where this, if it does, fits into the conversation of what we need to look at in terms of where we're gonna put what, and should that be a starting point as well?
The town master plan,
The A-town.
Yeah. we have, prior to this, opportunity, last year, we were putting budget requests in for, I think, a few years out, maybe FY 27, to start planning for the next comprehensive master plan. But is this going to impact that? Certainly. I mean, it's so hard, when we look at all the plans that we have, this parcel was not addressed in any way of kind of accessibility and connection to the neighborhoods around it. So, it kind of leaves a little bit of a gap in all of our planning that we've done from wastewater to, community planning. Transportation planning, it hasn't really been acknowledged as what it could be, so. Yeah, I think there are a lot of questions that need to be answered on how to reintegrate. And that's, what I'm hoping you all can help with too.
Is it, how could we find out about the process for the last master plan? How
Oh, we
long?
have some people, I think John was on the committee,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, so the comprehensive master plan happens every 10 years. And we finished it when 2021, maybe. 22.
I think so, yeah.
It's relatively recent still. And basically, it's a pretty, that's the kind of plan suggests, it's a comprehensive process of looking at the town's priorities over the next decade and beyond. And so I think that's actually would be a good reference document for us all to review. Because that is really the touchstone. So when things are being proposed by the town or by citizens that relate to investments or approvals by the town, oftentimes they'll kind of link to some priority expressed in the comprehensive master plan as a way to say, this is something that's a priority for the town. So I would think the priorities described in that plan would still be very much valid.
That's really well said. I think although it doesn't talk about the parcel specifically, it calls out that the residents who contributed to the plan care about mixed use housing and they care about transportation options. And so there are elements that can, and it goes into more detail too, but that can be applied to, well, if we had this new opportunity here, how do we envision it? There are themes throughout the plan that can help assist the thinking.
But it addresses things like tax-based diversification, economic vitality, housing diversity, housing production objectives, climate resiliency, a whole bunch of things that will absolutely form what we kind of do in terms of our opinions.
And where is that available?
On the website. Yeah.
So related to that, there's also a West Concord master plan that was done in 2010, which is also a little bit more localized. As I understand it, the West Concord Advisory Committee is taking up a review of that to try to understand where it is and how it might be updated, and it's really, quite logical for us to consider what's in that document and how this parcel relates to that, since it's so much, so likely to be in a West Concord.
Is that a subset of the Concord master plan?
Well, it was done in 2010, so it predates the most recent.
That was focused on West Concord in particular.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even really like a comprehensive plan. They called it a visual master plan. So it was kind of a graphic layout of where the redevelopment opportunities were inside West Concord, where the traffic problems were, et cetera, and then kind of different ideas for how they could be resolved, improved in the future. But it was just kind of, I would call it more aspirational than anything else, because there was no funding. The town had no intention to come in and do anything itself. With more kind of, for example, they codified some of the design standards for West Concord. They don't have a historic district in West Concord, but it said, retail shops you know, we like style like this. And it kind of described the way the village worked. And I'm not, it's a hard document to find. We should probably get a copy of that.
Yeah, we'll
I'm
send,
not sure you
send
can
both
find
of
it
those
on the
out.
website. But it's a good document because I think that in a sense, it could be a good blueprint for what we end up doing here. And then we can say, here's a big site. Here are what some of the priorities are. Here are some of the opportunities. And this is the kind of stuff we should be getting.
And since there are 35,000 in terms of the whole scope issue, where does DOT fit in, number two, and how, again, if we're thinking of scope, how do we begin to address that?
Yeah, good question. I think I might pass it over to Representative Gonzalez, who's been a tireless advocate for improvements and has had a lot of recent conversations. And when he has a start, that's kind of.
Yeah.
Okay, at this time on the agenda, proposing move to hear the legislative update from Representative Alden, please.
Thank you, Chairman Curdy, Chair Gainsborough, for inviting me and to the select board and members of this committee. It's really great to be with all of you. I've been excited about this committee for a long time, and it's just really nice to be in your presence. I'm joined by Arden Trudeau, who's a intern in my office, a Concord Carlisle High School graduate and a current student at possibly the best undergraduate graduate institution in the country, the University of Virginia, of which both a co-chair of this committee and I.
Where is that school?
So in listening to the questions that were posed to Megan, I thought that what might make the most sense to do with my time, and you should feel free to cut me off at any point, is to take a little bit of a running start about how we got here to this bill. And it's my understanding from conversations with Mark and Mary that most of you are fairly familiar with this, but I think it's important to just make sure we're pretty much on the same page and also understand how we got here. And I think that will help address some of the questions that have been posed thus far, and I'm very happy to answer any other questions that you have. So the governor filed as part of her fiscal year budget a bill to close the prison. And along with that bill was a lot of kind of pro forma language about a conveyance to decamp. And much of that language still exists in the bill that we have before us. And by the way, I think we can pretty much assume that this is going to be the language. I'll go into a little bit more detail of why, but this is what passed the House. This is what passed the Senate, almost identical. The earmark money is different. We'll get into that in a minute, but I'm just going to talk as if on July 31st, this is going to be what passes the conference of the legislature, and within 10 days after that, this is what the governor is going to sign. Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll came to Concord to the 1780 House, spoke about the collaborative relationship that the administration intends to have with the legislature and the town of Concord, which was exactly what I think we wanted to hear as a community. Personally, I felt, and I think a lot of people felt in the community, that we wanted some more meat on the bones about what that relationship would look like and the shape that it would take. So initially, what I proposed and began to share with members of the select board and members of the community was the concept of a state commission that would have seats for the town and other local and statewide interests. And among the people that I shared that with, and this is now after having many conversations with Commissioner Mackey and his team, I shared it with the commissioner. And from that point, the commissioner and I kind of sent red lines back and forth over the course of a couple of weeks and came up with this language together. So that's how we got there, how we got to where we are now. I think that this is a strong vision for a collaborative relationship that's going to inure to the benefit of the town. It is also going to allow us to aggressively pursue shared town, regional, and state interests. Looming over all of this, of course, is the town's zoning authority on the back end. So that is a very strong interest that the town has and power that the town has in this. But there's more than that, because what this does is give the town a lot of agency. And when I say the town, I specifically mean this committee, a lot of agency in what happens in the front end of this process while preserving the maximum amount of dexterity. And that's really when the commissioner and I were digging into the details of what we were trying to accomplish. Part of what we were trying to accomplish is preserving flexibility throughout this process as we get more and more information. So you'll see that while there's a requirement that DCAM go through all of these hoops and solicit all this input and write a study and report, there is a carve out ability for DCAM to make, for example, conveyances or easements to the town while that process is happening, if that is determined to be prudent by everybody involved. There has been at the beginning, and I think still a lot of questions about the concept of a sales partnership agreement. So I wanted to take a moment to address that, because that was in the original bill that Governor Healy filed, and that option is still in here. And I think from the moment of the meeting with the lieutenant governor and with the commissioner and leadership from the town, there was not a lot of confidence in that being the right initial step. And I think there were different reasons for that. I think on the state side, the commissioner could talk more to this, but I think the general gist of it was the state wanted to have more agency, more control than simply selling the land to the town. At the beginning, there's a long history in Massachusetts of that not working out very well and the land going fallow. One of the reasons for that is that the municipality often does not know what it's buying. And also does not necessarily have the bandwidth and the money to deal with the process of the conveyance. And this, of course, is a parcel that's entirely in state land. And so I think that those are very meritorious considerations. I think on the town side, and again, I can't speak for the town, but I think the town shared a lot of those concerns. They didn't necessarily know what it was buying and understood that it can be very, very expensive to go through the process of a conveyance. And so what we have here is something different, something more collaborative, which I think is going to work. And the main reason why I think it's going to work is because this committee is constituted by people with a lot of experience and ability in this area. I feel like the town is at the tip of the spear of this process. And if you don't feel that way, I want you to pressure test that with hard questions to me. But I think that this sets us up for success. There are a few things that in talking to people around town, I got a lot of the same questions that I think you're getting, and so try to incorporate that in here. So for example, people have been working on 1229 and other projects around town and potential housing projects have asked, how is whatever happens in the MCI parcel going to incorporate what's already moving in these other areas of town? And so the bill actually requires the consideration of that in the final report from a number of different angles. So it requires it, and there's a specific mention of the 2030 plan or any other plans that are happening in the town. It requires consultation and the reflection of that consultation with this committee and with the select board. So if no one else, if none of those entities talk about those other things, then I don't know what happened, but there is ample opportunity to have that reflected in the final report that DCAM is going to have to put together. With respect to the earmark, everything Megan said was accurate.
The money does, in my understanding, and I think it's pretty strict, but definitely feel free to pressure test this, does have to be spent. And if it's not spent, it reverts back to the state. However, this isn't the last money that we can possibly get. You may have seen news in the housing bond bill that Speaker Mariano's district got $1 billion NWRA project, but that was for a really exciting redevelopment that's been 10 years in the works. And so these things, the money can flow over time, and I think it can be pursuant to the fiscal year budget and supplemental budgets. That's part of my job, is to try to make sure that the state is adequately resourcing these projects over the course of time. This is not going to be a 10 or 12-month project. It's going to take longer than that. And I've worked with Commissioner Baki to try to figure out what is the appropriate amount of money, what kinds of consultants may be needed. And so the idea is exactly what Megan said. There are going to be a pool of consultant types that are needed, contractor types that are needed. DCAM and this committee should be talking about what is the universe of that work that needs to be done. And then with the money that the town gets, it peels off some, DCAM peels off some, you figure out the details of who makes sense to take what, and then you go from there, and then you share the information, which is of course critical, and that is in everybody's best interest. With respect to the Department of Transportation, so one thing that I noticed as all this information was coming out is MassDOT, to its credit, and by the way, the people who have been working on the Route 2 corridor and the Rotary stuff, the same exact people who did the Crosby's Corner overpass. So we've got, MassDOT has folks who have been involved in our community before and have actually done a major project in our community before. But when they came out to do their public sessions, which I had requested upon coming into office about Route 2, they planned that and they did that work without knowing that the prison was closing. So part of what this bill does is it requires the state agencies to talk to each other, because that doesn't always happen automatically. And I know that MassDOT is plugged in here. I speak with them frequently, because I share a passion for fixing the Rotary, and so with many people in our community. So that is something that we discuss quite a bit, and I think that that has to be a priority when it comes to what happens with this parcel. But you can't do anything about that until you have the information that you need. So that's something, and I think there may have already been some outreach from this committee to MassDOT, and I'm happy to facilitate that in whatever way I can be helpful. With respect to the earmark, just doubling back to that for a minute. So the amount that I filed with Rep. Gentile was $250,000. And then Senator Barrett, not to be outdone, took it up to almost twice that, so 475. In terms of where we'll land, I'm guessing it'll be, I think, at least 250,000, hopefully 475. And then one other thing, just kind of tangentially involved with your work there. I know there have been a lot of questions in the community about public access to the prison before it is closed and or gone. And I had made a request shortly after the announcement of the closure came out to the Department of Corrections to provide public access to members of the community to the facility. And that request is going to be granted, and I'm working with the select board to figure out who in the community that will be, and we will go from there. But I know that folks on this committee, and perhaps some folks on the Zoom, nice to see a lot of familiar faces there, have been asking about that. So I will stop there and answer any questions that you might have. Thanks. Yes, Lee.
The Route 2 Rotary MassDOT piece of the whole puzzle, do you anticipate that will be separate pots of money? Is from prison pots of money?
It'll be separate from anything, any current pot of money. Yes. Ultimately, could they mix in some scenario? I can't really say, but the fix to the Rotary is going to be very expensive. It's probably going to involve federal funds, almost certainly. If we do what I want to do, it'll involve some federal funds. And so I think that's, I don't think that will defray, I think what we want to do is try to make sure it complements what's happening.
If I understood the question, you asked whether the planning for Route 2 would actually be able to draw against that number.
It will not.
I didn't mean as much as the money that would be directed to Concord, but just the entirety of the funds that are directed towards due diligence and master planning, whatever else happens to the prison site.
So on that point, and the commissioner can speak more to that, there are no, and this is something we discussed during the budget process. There are no other funds that are specifically dedicated to the prison besides the earmark to the town of Concord right now, but DCAM has its own very substantial budget. And given that this is the commissioner's 4th time here in person in the past few months, you can tell that this is something, he has the entire state. This is something that is a priority, and I think that will be reflected in the way that DCAM spends its money. Yes.
Hi, Simon. I'm just curious, how can Concord determine whether a sales partnership is a good thing or a bad thing? At this point in time, it seems premature to all of a sudden sort of be angry. That's not a good decision.
Yeah, so I think that's right, and I think it's a question of what information is dug up
Right,
literally
exactly.
and figuratively from the process that's about to happen. And so I think that along the way, as there's a clear line of communication with DCAM and others with me, there may come a time when selling the land, conveying the land to the town makes a lot of sense for everybody. To be clear, the way it kind of the way the legislative and legal process works with this, the legislature could file a bill forcing the state to enter a sales partnership agreement in basically whatever terms it wanted. Senator Barrett and I, Rep. Gentile, have not done that because we're not hearing that from the town. But that's the course the town wants to take right now. Nor do I necessarily think that would be a prudent idea, but I could be convinced easily, I think, by you when there comes a time that does make sense. So I think there's nothing in here that says there's not going to be a sales partnership agreement. What it says is there's an option for a sales partnership when it comes to the conveyance.
There's just some other towns that have gone through this before, and they've done this cost benefit analysis of, the costs are you lose control of the program possibly, and they can have it, can sell to a developer or to be a shelter or whatever. There's also benefits, and we find that it's the cost of cleaning up and putting the site back together again is reasonable and could be shared, possibly with DCAM. Maybe there's an option for that. Because there's a sharing possibility, like some of the other towns have sort of a share with the developer they sell to. So there's options too. I just want to keep the doors open for this sales partnership.
And I think what we have here again, it provides that door remains open. Good. From a legal standpoint. All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Actually,
Thank you.
thanks.
Thanks for all this.
Many mentions of DCAM, maybe, given that we have the honor of having the commissioner here, might invite him, into the conversation if you have any comments, Commissioner, or, the committee has any questions.
I didn't do that.
Thank you.
I know I kind of got invited myself, I guess, to attend at the last minute, so you can put me on.
Great.
Well, welcome. I apologize for that. I'm very happy to be here. I think I can start with some very high level framing, that's very consistent with what you just heard from your representative. And the ECAM is coming at this, our role is to, in this case, to facilitate real estate activity on behalf of the county. The property currently is, I think everyone is familiar, remains in the care and control of the Department of Corrections. At some point, after they expect to have the last, incarcerated individuals moved out of the facility very soon. Then they will have a period of time where they need to do a lot of other stuff moving to the facility, from records to whatever else they have there. And at some point, they will then say, we no longer have anything here. We're done with it. It's surplus to us. Then it gets handed into the custody essentially of DCAM. And we are technically the landowners of all state property, but we also are the ones who manage the property that no other agency had acted. We are not really in the business of wanting to hold property for long periods of time in the future. We are actually, in this case and many others, our next sort of tier of responsibility is to try to facilitate the putting property like this back into productive use. And I think there's a general conclusion that productive use here is not further state use, so I go possibly a little bit from that stuff. But other than that, it's really intended to be some form of redevelopment. And if we work from that assumption, then we then take the perspective that, you know, has a clear interest in itself. So we approach this from the perspective of wanting to have a genuine partnership. So separating from the legalese of the sales partnership that's described in legislation. We want to have a partnership with you regardless of what the mechanism is that the property ultimately gets into the property. Takes. What we really want to do is work closely. I'm joined by Paul Lillehagen, who's our project manager. He's here virtually today, but he's been in Concord a number of times. And I think he's going to spend a lot of time in Concord over the next several months, years, maybe. We really want to work closely with you to figure out everything from the mechanics of how we all get the answers we all want to have, establish an understanding of the common vision, and then figure out how do we make that vision. That's something we want to do together. I think there are things that we as a state agency have access to that we do probably don't as a town. Conversely, there are a lot of things we do have the ability to do as the town that we don't. And I think the key is if we can reach a consensus about where we're headed, then we can look at those individual things that need to happen to get there and decide frankly who needs to have the lead on what. And some of that's going to be about spending money, some of that's going to not be about spending, and it's going to be about other things like writing regulations, but they're very definitely and we need to basically, I think, approach this as a joint effort and figure out how to do it. And one of those questions at the very end is going to be, what is the actual sort of transactional mechanism to get to be developed? And that might be a sales partnership. That's a suggest. It might also not be a sales partnership. We have experience with both as an agency. And there are pros and cons. And really the reason the legislation that was filed by the governor included a variety of options. That's to continue forward to the legislation that's been positively impacted by your delegation to look at it on behalf, is that we don't know the answer to what the right approach is going to be. We want to keep all those options on the table. We want to figure that out. And that's going to be informed again by a process that really needs to start with a sense of really understanding what's there. That's where I think my team has already started to go figuring out how to get answers. There. I will such as points. I think other people might be in that. We want to then understand what is the vision? What is it that makes sense for the state, for the region, certainly for the community with this property? And how do we know those two? And then what are all of the actions and steps that are going to get there as expeditiously as possible, although I think we should get it right. So this isn't about rushing, it's about doing it expeditiously, but right. And that's really the vision that we frankly have. I think the legislation is crafted in a way that I think will get us to that. And I think a lot of the actions that we're going to obviously have to earn your trust we go on that as we move forward with the true sense of working together and collaborating on the subject. That is absolutely where we want to be. we don't have don't think we as a state agency have as much of a prejudice approaching that conversation. As some might fear, we might really are genuinely interested in coming up with the right answer. That right answer really starts with a vision. It's grounded in solid. Feels this way. So I'm also happy to take questions that answers what I can.
Thank you. Can you elaborate a little bit more sort of on the interim state of the property? So you mentioned it would take the president a little while to move out. Does that take months? A year? And then when we're also going through this, what is like the physical state of the property? Is it boarded up? Is it a construction zone? Like what's the interim aesthetics that will look under DCAM's
Well,
possession?
my goal is to have DCAM's position as pretty as possible. So we're gonna use the time parallel with the Department of Corrections doing abatement to we want to, at that same time, in parallel, work closely with you. Frankly, a lot of the changes that the legislature put forward with the current version of the bill puts some pressure on all of us to finish that process. So that when the Department of Corrections says, okay, we are done, and we're ready to develop, we are very quickly able to then move toward a situation where you all have enacted a regulatory regime that dictate very clearly what's possible. It's not possible. And that the more that can be clear, the easier it is for us to then do whatever the meetings of for soliciting the development. It happens again until the push is possible. So DCAM's care and control period is as much as possible. Because ultimately, what will help move it from its current state to toward that future state is getting hands who are committed and committed in a manner that is regular with local structures to do whatever is to answer the very specific question you asked. It was definitely the months. Won't be surprised if a year from now, the Department of Corrections still propose the property. I know they hope not to. But it's that range of time.
Talked about the things that you're doing, and then in the legislation, there's a bit of a timeline. Can you speak to that, or the process that you kind of are going through?
Sure, well, there's a few things that are dictated in legislation. One is at the core of legislation, really a description of the report, which I think it was really the documentation of the life. And that has very specific timelines to it. First of which is like, we're going to have to hold a public hearing in the community within 45 days. So that's probably going to be a little after that will then translate into subsequent things forward, and it does call for getting that report completed in this little time. The other thing that is dictated in this legislation has to happen very quickly after it's passed, which is that we will have to extend an offer to you all regarding this work. So I think that the wastewater. So that is actually something that I think is important to think about, both in the context of what happens with the whole property, but also somewhat ahead of what happens with is the wastewater plant. And I'm sure us extending the offer to you is just the beginning of what would be probably a lengthy conversation there, but that will also happen fairly quickly.
Sorry, the offer on the wastewater plant is what exactly? Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, we don't know exactly what it is yet. We're still doing our own due diligence to understand what the wastewater plant is a facility that was created and currently is operated and maintained by the Department of Corrections. It serves the MCI Concord property, but it also serves what they call the farm, the Northeast Correctional Center. It also serves a couple of smaller buildings that are operated by MassDOT and the Massachusetts State Police in the vicinity. And their needs will continue to need to be accounted for. But the feeling is there's more capacity there. We don't know how much more. That's something we're trying to figure out also. But there is definitely more capacity there than what's needed to continue those state functions, and I think that's something we all need to understand a little bit. And we will then make some, extend an offer to the community, probably your wastewater utility or whatever their official title is, to you know, preserve the state's needs and then take on what needs you know, what needs you may have, or evaluate what needs you may have. So that will be something that will come up early on in this discussion. So I think you all should prepare for that on your end as well.
I'm curious to know the sequencing from past experience with like community input, our role, your role, and then bring on board like a master planning consultant. How far in the future and like what happens first and what's been successful?
There are a lot of ways to think about that, but I do think that there is a nexus between engagement or among engagement with the community and stakeholders, planning, visioning, figuring out how to translate a vision into something tangible. And then the regulatory structure that's put in place to hopefully enable that vision and probably restrict alternatives to that. All of that should be thought of together. And it will be an iterative process. It's somewhat sequential. And clearly engagement has to happen to some degree first, and regulation probably happens at the back end of that. But I think those happen a little bit concurrently as well, and it isn't entirely linear. That I think is going to be a very substantial amount of partnership that we have with you, is sort of figuring that out. Our interest, and I'll be pretty transparent with you, our interest in that process is there are certain things the state is very interested in. It's no secret that housing production is very high on that list. So I don't think the state's going to be too happy with a vision that has no housing whatsoever. But I think there's a fair amount of flexibility as to what that looks like and what else happens and all of that, absolutely. And I think our interest as we would like to end up at a place where the entitlement risk associated with implementing the vision is as little as possible. Because that will help, whether it's us soliciting a developer or whether it's the town soliciting a developer under some partnership. That will make the market much more interested in this property and make it happen faster and be more successful. And it will not be an prison site for any longer than it absolutely needs to be. So I think getting to a process that helps us get to a place where there's a comfort level shared among all stakeholders, not just the people in this room, with a consensus idea of where we're headed and a way to entitle that in a manner that has as little risk to the development community as possible, is what will get us to a really successful outcome as efficiently as possible. But we can't get there unless there's a whole lot of engagement. Because you can't do that wrong either. You can't do that sort of in a way that people don't feel support for.
Thank you.
So just one question along those lines, Evan. When I look at this, I just see astronomical demolition costs. So is there a way to sort of, would the state consider phasing some of that or reducing the land sale to get to that point where we're reducing risk for the development community? Just to try and make that nut as small as possible.
I can't speak for all parts of the state, but I can speak for my agency because we wouldn't see any of the money anyway. Our goal here is not to maximize the return from the real estate transaction. That is not the goal. The goal is again to leverage whatever resources everyone is bringing to the table, including us, to get us to a place where we're starting to achieve a redevelopment, again, that makes sense to everybody as efficiently as possible. So if there is some give and take around land value and who captures land value versus reinvesting that either directly or indirectly, I think that's very much on the table. Whether that is a demolition or something completely different, I don't think any of us know anything about that.
Along those lines, I'm curious to get your thoughts on how we can both work together with your agency and this advisory board. And, you know, maybe if there are any models that you've seen, whether in the Commonwealth or otherwise, to point to as a guide.
Well, it's interesting, we have various forms of partnerships and relationships with projects and municipalities all across the Commonwealth, and I don't think any two of them are the same. So, and it's not a judgment call on one being better or worse than another. I think they are all a product of the constituents involved and the nature of the circumstances. There are places where the market is, you know, extremely weak and challenged, and it's all about how do you subsidize something to make something happen that people want that isn't at all possible financially. There are others where, and I think you're on the opposite end in respects, where you actually have a very strong market. So in some ways, it's about figuring out how to make that happen and do things that are not, you know, that are in the public interest in addition to the private interest, which will be able to motivate itself, I'm sure. So the model is different. I think the other thing that you all have here that is almost unparalleled is the level of sort of sophistication and knowledge and capacity in the sort of citizenry that is interested in being involved. And just the folks sitting around this table, I know a few of you from past relationships, and I know some of you from your bios. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge and expertise here. So I think the relationship we're gonna have with you is not the same as anywhere else, largely because of that, and I hope you don't mind us leaning on some of that expertise. As we move forward, so I kind of don't wanna say we should do it like such and such a town or such and such a site, because I think we're gonna be able to do something better here that makes sense for Concord.
So along those lines, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, we can of course take it offline as appropriate, but just thinking about how we begin to then work together. And you know, there's been a lot of discussion around stakeholders, DCAM, MassDOT, the town. I'm sure there's twice as many important stakeholders that I haven't mentioned, but how would you like to kind of get started, especially in terms of the basics of kind of understanding how you see your scope? Especially, and then I think, given that you're a state entity and we're a new body, you know, we can use you to then build off of or work, you know, understand where our boundaries are.
Yeah, well, there aren't any boundaries between us, again, I hope it.
Sorry, I meant just in terms of being clear and
Yeah, what I think will make a lot of sense is for Paul and Abby Vladek, who works with Paul on a public-private partnership team within our real estate group, to work very closely with the staff that is supporting this committee to really outline the, you know, a model for sort of how we're going to move forward and what are all of the boxes that need to get checked. And I think that then needs to be reviewed with you all and make sure that you think that's the right model. But assuming we get to a place where we all agree on the model, then there's a part of, okay, well, these are the things that make a lot of sense for the town to do with the earmark money that's hopefully gonna come through, because it can happen between now and next June, or because it is something the town should own, as opposed to the state own, have people perceive that the state is imposing that in some manner. And there are other things that it absolutely makes more sense for the state to be responsible for. And I think it's hard and also very easy to just go down the list and say, well, you know, the state should do that, the town should do this. And I think that's gonna be something that happens between the two staff teams, and we'll all probably get a little bit part of that conversation as well and refine. But I don't think it sounds daunting, because right now there's a lot more all of us don't know than we do. But it's all, and it isn't really that. I think we're gonna have a beginning model for how we work together. But real estate development has been done before.
Yeah.
Why you?
you mentioned the word regulations a few times, just broadly speaking, how do you see that applying to this project? Meaning, will there be, maybe I misunderstood, but will there be regulations governing this whole project or?
Well, I assume so, because right now I think you guys have it zoned for basically state use. And I don't think that's where anybody sees it going in the future. So there will have to be a new regulatory structure put in place through your town meeting.
Local, I was thinking more state, like CMRs, but. No.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's,
Okay.
we're not gonna, this is really about land use regulations in Massachusetts. People can debate whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, but it is done at the local level and for the most part, and I don't think that's really gonna change. I mean, there are certain things that make sense to, and happen at the state level, but the vast majority of this, especially when we talk about private party in the end, they're subject to the regulatory protocols that get put in place by the community.
So another question that comes up for me and pretty frequently in the community. It's sort of a two-parter for me, but how do you think about historic structures? And I know there are some here. And are there, we've dealt with the wastewater treatment, we know there's some historic, are there any other sort of categories of attributes of this particular parcel that it might get some additional focus in the planning process that we should be aware of and starting to think about when we are visioning about this?
Yeah, yes, so there's a couple of things, from the historic perspective, that's gonna come into play at a couple of stages. Because we are a state agency and this is state property, we are required to consult with the Massachusetts Historical Commission. The act of the state disposing, I don't mean that by throwing it away, but conveying property to some other party, even to a municipality, is an action that triggers consultation with the Massachusetts Historical Commission, which we will be doing. They will certainly be interested in some of the structures on the site. I think, having, from the one time I've been inside the walls, the things they're gonna be most interested in, I think, are the things you can see from the outside of the walls. I think what's inside is, there's less that Mass Historic is kind of funded. Yes. So, but they will definitely, certainly that main historic building, right?
Yeah.
Right at the front, that's gonna be something they're gonna be very, very interested in seeing preserved and restored, which I think, it's a landmark, that makes a lot of sense. There are certain advantages to the use of historic structures from a tax basis and other things that may help with financing development to one degree or another. So I think that'll be a good iterative conversation as we move forward. Other things that I think will be important for all of us to get a collective handle on, and I really do want to approach it that way. It's not like we're gonna get our information and you're gonna get yours. We're gonna need to know, you mentioned demolition, we should know something about if things are not historic and they don't make sense to retain. How's that gonna affect the economics of redeveloping property? Wastewater is not the only utility. There are other utilities that understanding both capacity available and what it would take to get to the site as well as distribution within the site is something we need to know about. I think we need to know a little bit about what conditions may or may not exist in the ground of the property. And then we'll be doing a non-invasive, at least initially, 21E study to understand what may be there. Because that also will affect how someone would approach redeveloping property and costs associated therewith. That's a non-exhaustive list, but there may be other things as we move forward that will help inform that process. Another huge question, which I think we've touched a little bit on the Rotary and MassDOT at the sort of periphery of this, but there's some other transportation questions that I think we're going to need to be really important parts of planning this, about how it connects to the areas around it, how it relates to theirs. I don't think the vision here is going to be that this property is going to continue to basically be a walled enclave separate from everything around it. I think you want to reconnect it to things. And that's, for vehicles, but also for pedestrians, bikes, and even boats, potentially. These are things we're gonna probably also be thinking about how does that work? And how does it affect other properties in the vicinity that also have redevelopment potential? And how does it either help or hinder the way we think about this property? I think these are all important questions to inform this process together.
I think it was a good question. I actually just came back today from South Africa. And on Saturday, I was visiting Robben Island, which is where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned for 18 years. And it's really, they probably didn't have the process quite like this, right? But they turned the whole thing into a museum. I don't think that's where they're headed. No, I appreciate your mentioning MHC and MassDOT. Are there other agencies or other? I think we have a good sense of who the stakeholders in this community will be, right? We have good representation on the table. But are there others in the Commonwealth that you might have heard from who might be kind of wild cards that we haven't imagined could be interested in doing something with the site?
Well, I'll tell you, the very first phone call that I received about this after it was published in the governor's budget was actually from the Department of Agriculture.
Okay.
And their concern is that the farm uses that they perceive to be part of MCI Concord continue. Good news, I guess, from their perspective, and probably from a lot of our perspectives, is the answer is absolutely yes, because they aren't actually part of MCI Concord. And farm functions are all going to continue, but that's an agency that expressed interest right off the bat. A lot of the state's environmental agencies are going to be interested in this property in varying degrees, and will have a stake because I think it's likely that the NEPA office will have some level of interest in this as well. The NEPA, the Massachusetts Environmental Permitting Act. They will, and that process canvasses all of the state's environmental agencies. So from DCR to, again, all of the environmental agencies there. And so they will all have a voice, have an opportunity to express what's important to them in this as well. I don't imagine they're gonna discover or turn over a whole lot that is different from what your own environmental folks in the community will also be concerned with. I doubt there's gonna be a lot of tension there, but yeah, it's certainly possible it's something they come up and others might not follow.
Is there one agency that's kind of the focal point for the housing, kind of interested in seeing lots of housing? Or are there numerous agencies that would be part of that conversation?
Well, I think given the very clear challenge that the Commonwealth of Massachusetts faces as a whole, housing being probably the most significant constraint on our economy. All of the state government is interested in that to a degree. Housing in livable communities certainly is the primary agency. Also, I'm sure will be very interested. People may be interested in them as well, because if to the extent that the affordability of housing, as opposed to just the supply of housing, becomes part of this conversation, then people will, of course, be turning to housing in livable communities for their subsidy programs that they send the gatekeepers to as well.
So the NEPA question that you just raised reminded me that maybe one of the things we could look towards driving this project is doing an umbrella permit, a NEPA umbrella permit, which looks at all of the impacts from the full development and gets a permit issued for it rather than having each individual developer have to come in and go through the NEPA process. Would make this parcel would add value to the town because people would save at least 9 months or a year by going through this, and that makes it much more attractive in terms of redevelopment. And that would be something we might be able to do with the information that we're gathering, is end up putting this into umbrella permits.
Not to mention the cost savings.
Yeah.
It's a great idea.
And I just wanted to quickly, I had thanks to Shannon had sent around and just a note about ULI and our technical assistance panels. Paul, I think recently you had met with Michelle Landers. I spoke with her today. So today is not the time to get into what ULI can offer, but I think soon is, as we think about how we want to allocate the budget, because a lot of this figuring out sort of who we need to engage and how we need to do it, and the timing of all that is really good foundation that DOI can offer to us. So we should certainly circle back together on that call.
Do they charge for their
They do.
services?
Yep, and so there's varying programs, you can have a fully intensive program where folks come nationally, you spend 5 days together, you tour the site, I mean, it's like really in the weeds. And then they have different programs where you could spend a day together. So, and it's pretty flexible, right? We can sort of, I think, create a program that would work for us. But it's certainly experts in every arena of real estate development and conveyance and state and public partnerships.
Emily, question about that. Is that something that you would suggest would be in parallel to community engagement or running ahead of community engagement so that we could use it to inform what we were communicating to the community about the site? I mean,
I would say in parallel or ahead of, because I think they're gonna pop up, you know, we do have great knowledge in this room, but they may know something we don't know through prior experience. So I think probably the best way to vet, if we find that that's a, you know, a viable option for us, is to, they'd be happy to, I'm sure you can come to one of our meetings, or we could set them up on Zoom and they can tell us a little bit more about their programs and how they work. But I would say, as with anything, right, when you have that access to that, it's an incredible resource, the sooner the better to engage.
I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but do you envision, if this is a mixed use with housing and maybe some other uses, is it one developer or is it multiple developers in these situations like this size of a parcel?
I definitely don't think we know the answer to that question at this point.
No, but is it like you go, like you keep, I mean, ideally, does a town like go to one developer for the 60 acres, or do they parcel up based on the use of the? I'm just curious.
Well, I mean, I have personally done both in the past, in when I used to be in this municipal official.
Yeah.
There's an advantage to having a single sort of master developer involved. There's also an advantage, and again, the more there's an alignment between a master plan for the site, not your town master plan, but master plan for the site that is as much as possible fully entitled, the more you can both ensure that multiple parties, whether they are through a single master developer or entirely independent of one another, are working in cohesion, which I think is ultimately where we probably want to end up.
Yeah.
I just want to sort of add on to that, Scott, because it may be the financing may drive us to parcel out different components. So maybe we look at the stuff on the west side of Commonwealth Avenue and put some multifamily housing or something over there and generate some funds to, you know, pay for part of the demo. Which I'm coming back to.
No, just wants to swing it.
Recycling.
So there's been some mention of the parcel with the parking lot that's used currently on the side of the Rotary. And that being kind of reserved for DOT, I don't know if you can speak to.
Which parcel are you talking about?
So it's the,
Cross Commonwealth?
yeah, it's cross Commonwealth, it's the parking parcel of the correction, part of the correction is Park Zone, I think, currently.
Yeah, okay, well. As of this moment, I have not heard from the Department of Corrections that they are definitely including that parking.
Oh, really?
I think they will, and some, they're gonna have a use for it beyond. But in prior conversations with them, the focus has been on the east side of Commonwealth Avenue. That's what they are absolutely certain that they're gonna divest of, because remember, they will continue to operate on the other side of Route 2, the Northeast Corrections Facility. I do believe that there's a sort of, I don't know if it's active farmland, but that parcel that has the parking has agricultural as well. It's very likely that agricultural use will continue regardless of what happens with the park itself as well. So these are some of the questions that we'll need to get clarified a bit further as we move into this. There definitely are a lot of, I don't say they're telling you I have all the answers, and I'm just hiding from it. There's a lot of things that we all figure out as we move forward.
This is a paranoid question, but is there any possibility that somebody like an Amazon or a Walmart comes in and just makes such a telling off to the state that the whole process gets thrown out the window?
I have a hard time imagining how that could possibly happen without the town having a lot of control over that, because I don't think you're zoned for those kinds of uses, even if we thought that was compelling, and that's not on the tip of our minds as a priority.
Not unless they put apartments on top.
Representative?
To Aaron's question, as far as my conversations with MassDOT have gone, almost any iteration of a significant improvement to the rotary would require the use of that parking lot. And so I just offer that to bear that in mind. Also, another good reason to drag MassDOT in here to talk to them about that.
Yeah, I imagine this, for the same reasons, MassDOT did not know this was coming. I didn't know this was coming. So, budget. They may be thinking about a variety of different ways of thinking about the rotary that they wouldn't have thought possible. If they thought that the correction facility was going to continue. The parking lot's an easy target to expand and adjust transportation infrastructure, as opposed to, you know, moving the wall of the facility or something. But if we now are thinking about not having a wall facility and having that whole parcel available for reconsideration, there may be other solutions to the rotary that they haven't thought about yet, because they didn't think they could.
Yeah, there's just more to that whole parcel. I think there's a cemetery and some other aspects of it.
I don't think anyone's going to be looking to move the cemetery.
Right, exactly.
That will continue.
But I think it's a very good question, and I think that there's a level of local traffic flow considerations that involve the redevelopment of the property that have never been on the table before when we start to look at this. And so I would hope that almost everybody's got a clean sheet of paper out. I'll just throw out there too, that right across Commonwealth Avenue on Warner's Pond, we've got a whole process spun up right now, trying to understand what we as a community want to do with the pond. We held a public forum about that last week. It was enlightening in the sense that it was a facilitated information gathering with a lot of people, of course, from the very immediate environment of Warner's Pond, coming out to bring in their thoughts. But one of the real through lines of that was almost everybody, regardless of whether they were in favor of retaining the pond or in favor of dam removal, was interested in how that whatever takes place might interact with whatever is coming from here. And I think it would be silly not to really begin to consider those things together, because the opportunities around coordination have never been higher if we take advantage of that. Yes, please.
Something, thank you. I want to respond to a question that John brought up, being paranoid about an Amazon or some kind of distribution center. And in fact, when we first started thinking about this, I got legal counsel advice on this. And I have a memo that we might invite him in here, but actually it's zoned industrial right now. It's not zoned government. So there could be a little bit of exposure. And I think that's something that we would want to bring Mina in soon, so that we learn what we can do about that, if anything.
Okay.
I think that may be an area where we can partner with you as well. If there are things that are inadvertently allowable.
Yes.
But undesirable.
Right, exactly.
We are still the landowner. And the landowner has to be involved in any development, even if the zoning allows it.
Okay.
So while we've been very clear in saying you have a lot of authority over what happens there through your regulation, we kind of do in a different way because we're still here. So I think if we want to, the focus really needs to be on getting to that consensus about what the vision here is. And I suppose maybe it is an Amazon warehouse. I don't think that's likely. Maybe. then we can also figure out both what we can do to make sure other things don't happen, as well as to make sure that that does happen.
It might be a two-step process, where we do something in the interim.
Sure,
we
yeah,
talked
and
about
you
that.
absolutely have that.
We talked about that with our legal counsel, and then something that when we have our vision, what zoning do we need to enable that vision?
Maybe we could, you know, have one of our meetings talk about the interim period and what uses we don't want to see, so we at least get those down in writing and can share them with Adam and his team. In terms of that's for the short term to avoid shooting ourselves in the foot.
I had a question, in your experience, with PCAM, taking possession of land and then conveying it, you know, for something of this scope, and I know there's probably no perfect analog. But can you guys, give us kind of a range of how long PCAM would typically own something like this?
Well, it's again, it's an enormous range.
Or just case law, right? Like what?
There are. At the one, let me kind of try to frame it, I guess, is the way to look at this. At one end. I'm from Lowell. There's a couple of courthouses in Lowell that are no longer functioning as courthouses and haven't been for a couple of years now since the new courthouse opened. Those are still under the care and control of the trial court. DCAM has not yet taken possession of them, and the expectation is basically that DCAM may never actually have care and control. We have the underlying ownership, we always have. But they may go basically straight from trial court care and control to the development, if everything goes well. At the other end of the extreme, we have some former state hospital, public health type hospital property up in western Massachusetts that closed decades ago, and we still own. And they are completely under care and control because there's no economic redevelopment potential or reuse potential. Some of it has been put in conservation status, but others is somewhat in limbo waiting for something to materialize. And that's kind of the bookends, I guess. So I know you're looking for something really specific, that's a fair precedent.
That really is.
There really is just, again, each case is going to be unique. I think there is the potential here because of how attractive of a community you have. And again, if we can really genuinely work together to fairly expeditiously understand the vision and create a structure to implement that vision, that we can probably work pretty quickly together. And I think the development community is going to be very interested in this. I think the key is figuring out how to channel that interest into something that's productive toward that vision. So this is going to be on the positive end of that.
Perfect.
Perhaps to facilitate things, we could make a request of Megan and staff to give us a list of the current allowed uses and the current prohibited uses on the site, and then maybe share that at our next meeting.
I think that probably makes some sense too, and I believe that we were sort of teeing up, Paul and Abby, who both work for Adam to come and they've, at least we got a preliminary assessment of what's on the site, and I think that I'm gonna look to Paul and see whether he's not, they're getting close to being ready to be able to share that as at least a sort of a once overview of what's there, so. At least tentatively, we would know along those lines for the next session, which would be in 2 weeks.
Yeah, that's right. We thanks, Mark. We've been talking with Mark and Megan about getting on your schedule, hopefully a couple weeks from now.
Great. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you for joining today. Good. We've got two more main agenda items, I think that could probably be collapsed into almost one, which is really just being forward looking. And setting I would say the agenda for future meetings, as well as how we kind of govern ourselves, which came up at the end of last meeting. Maybe we start there, and I would almost just open it up for discussion, and then we can align, I think, as a committee on how we want to take it away and document some of our governance. As far as I know, all I've seen so far is the progress we made last week and kind of aligning on meetings being Monday at noon, at least for the foreseeable future. But would love to, maybe start with thinking about how we want to set, what our approach will be to setting goals. Right, what does success look like for this committee? What are the prior, a lot of discussion around scope today. What do we know are priority investigations, regardless of whether it's going to be kind of our committee's responsibility or others. The identification of stakeholders, many were mentioned today. Probably heard 10 major stakeholder groups or so. Just making sure that we have kind of that collectively exhaustive list identified. And then, I admittedly am new to this type of public service. So just being clear on how we are then organizing, how we get work done when we're here, and how we can get work done when we're not here, so that we're, hopefully making progress in between our meetings. I know that's a lot. I would open it up. I'd welcome any thoughts from the group.
What's the rule about breaking up into groups from an open meeting? What's the rule now?
So we're subject to open meeting law. A couple of simple approaches is an individual can take on a task and an investigation on their own. We've also, there's some case law that suggests that another member of the committee could volunteer to assist in that, but it's an individual task. If there is a desire to work together as groups, those would be subcommittees and would be subject to open meeting law and need to post and set up for agendas. So that can be facilitated, those could be virtual meetings, but that's kind of in broad strokes the way to do it. So the most practical thing to do is for individuals to take on tasks or follow-ups and then bring back and read back. When you do develop materials, the safest way to do that is to give the material to Shannon, ask Shannon to distribute it to the group, and then do not engage in, like, if you get something like that, bring it into a meeting to discuss your thoughts, because that comes to deliberation. But certainly, especially given there are things that are likely to be long and require some reading to do, it makes sense to distribute things ahead of time. Those things can be included in the packet. At the bottom of our page, you'll even see today, the packet was basically the minutes from the last meeting, and also this document, which Dan had started last week, or last time he had suggested that we collect concerns and stakeholders just as a laundry list to try and make sure that we don't miss anybody in the idea that would be. So those kinds of things can be distributed in the packet, they become public documents, and then we can do feedback on those. Okay. Hopefully that's
helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I try to answer Patrick's question?
Sure.
Personally, I don't feel like we're ready to jump into these questions tonight. But at our last meeting, we said we had a real need to better understand what had transpired up to this point, right? Getting the representatives' input, having Adam here was awesome. I feel much better grounded than I did 2 weeks ago about like where the process stands. And I got to say that I have a lot of trust in him. And he said, well, he'll earn our trust. I think I really kind of appreciate the way he's communicating, kind of the indication that they really do want to work with us, right? So it feels like the beginning of a really partnership. So I feel like we can kind of check the box on, okay, I think we have a pretty good understanding as to what came before. Maybe the next meeting should be focused, okay, now that we understand that context, and now let's dive into these questions, and maybe we try to finish the next meeting with kind of a first pass answer to those 3 or 4 questions over there.
Yeah, so what I do know that staff is preparing is, you know, a high level, what's presentation, like, you know, what is the administration building, how big is it? What, you know, those kinds of things, and what are the attributes of the site, so that should be a next level. I think, it will assist us in understanding the site a little bit more deeply, and then I think we are headed towards figuring out when we know enough to sort of communicate that to the community and ask that question, now that you know what we know, or a summary of what we know, what do you guys think we should be focused on here? What are the goals? And then, of course, we also talk to the background documents that we already have, the townwide master plan, the West Concord master plan, and some of those documents which can envision Concord 2030, which can inform us as to, you know, sort of what the community's been thinking about, and so we can begin to formulate some idea of how this opportunity fits into that.
I just had on the stakeholders, a couple of additions. I don't know if I should just send that in to Shannon or just take the time to get, I know it's running late to talk about it, but should I just jump in or?
Yeah, well, this is kind of one of my questions about governance. I think there is a question on, I think it would be totally appropriate to share it now. I think we should also maybe the John suggestion, we can come back with a recommendation that I'm happy to work on as to how we want to do these types of things. Like if there's feedback on the stakeholder list, do we do that in committee? Is there a way to do that, you know, offline? And but please, that's kind of one of my questions.
Just, I didn't see recreation on the list.
Recreation Commission is in there.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, Concord Rec, and then the library and the town archivist. I have no idea if there's gonna be documents. I know there are libraries there, but I don't know if all the documentation goes to the state, or I don't, you know. And then the correctional community, I mean, I think, you know, we're not alone in terms of taking prisons and turning them into something else. And there's a lot of sensitivity both on the correctional staff and on prior, you know, incarcerated individuals about how you do that and how you treat them and how you have that dialogue. And I think that's something we need to be mindful about. And then finally, I think there were 3 chapels there, so some dialogue with the religious community. If they're Presbyterian, Catholic, and Muslim in the building. That's just what I read.
And since we're doing research, Megan, if the town's a member of the American Planning Association, maybe you could ask them to reach out to APA for their library for examples of prison reuse projects.
Yeah, I have a number of documents, along those lines that I'm happy to share. I think we talked about the last meeting, the best way to share materials. And I'm not sure exactly where we landed. Should I?
I think Dan was suggesting something like a portal. What I'm unclear of is, so the town uses SharePoint. I'm unclear on the board's level of comfortability if I were to make a folder that you all could access. Or if we would just put something on the website where I could just
publish these documents on your webpage. I also would just, I can't speak for IT on, if there would be any concerns of me trying to make a folder that 10 non-town email accounts would have access to. So I first would just need to get clearance from them, but then also I just wasn't sure if you all are comfortable accessing something like that. And if they shut me down, we can just use the town website.
So maybe as part of next week's meeting, we could understand just a little bit of the, if you could help us with some
Yeah.
homework on like the trade-offs between those two options.
Yeah.
And if IT comes back with any others, that would be great.
Yeah.
Thanks. Any other thoughts on the governance?
Just on that list, sorry, Recreation Commission, I did see that on there. What encompasses the Recreation Commission? Like, does that include, assume sort of all youth sports, right? There's a tremendous demand for some sort of sporting facility.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's a separate.
That probably is we can just see whether there's something else about sports leagues, but I think that's a fair point. Recreation commissions.
Hey, Mark,
Totally.
I apologize. I'm about to get on a flight, so I just want to make sure. I didn't see zoning board on that list.
Mhm. Okay,
That's my small contribution for you.
thank you, Elizabeth.
They-
But, to your point, the recreation commission is basically the BD Center or the Concord Rec programs. And they do some coordination with the youth sports leagues and to some extent the schools, but.
Yeah, I think the
Probably doesn't
whole
really
expanse
cover
of youth
Yeah.
sports. Like, people-
And so one way to collect lists like this is to have them go out published and then send the individual comments, just like you would with minutes, if you back to Shannon, and then she can compile them into the next packet together, and that way we can see them, as long as they're not going directly.
I could distribute Dan's Word document if that would be helpful and people can redline from there, if that's something you'd like to do as a starting point.
So I just, plans that we need to be consistent with. I know recreation is doing a recreation master plan right now. And I would really like to see what their thoughts are in terms of 229 Main Street and, our site, and which, or if they're planning on thinking about both of them, because we really need to, as we've said, coordinate and collaborate. It's a real good opportunity.
Yeah.
Whenever I start building this list and it gets long, I start thinking about the whether or not there might be some method we could get to engage directly with whoever built those plans and say, here's the, give them a dump of, this is what we know about the site. Tell us what your needs, wants, opportunities look like, and sort of, get that back from, whether it be the Recreation Commission or some other groups, and try to be a little bit more of a collector of that than have to go out and become master class on each one of these plans ourselves.
You know, we can do though, I think, Mark, we can put together our initial list of stakeholders. It may not be comprehensive, because there may be some we just overlooked by mistake. But then we can have kind of a meeting where we invite anyone who's interested in sharing, when we get to the community engagement part.
Right.
We can make sure that all the committees get invitations, and if there are people, like, I don't know if the cemetery committee would be interested in this in some way, who knows, right? But I wouldn't put them as a primary stakeholder on our list, but they may send someone to the meeting just to find out what's going on, right? So I think when we get to the community engagement part, that's when we can be sure that everyone understands this is happening, and has the opportunity to step forward if they're interested.
Yeah, we've recently started to use this roundtable format. In fact, there's one tomorrow night. I should probably, around sustainability. It's gonna happen at the library. Everybody that has an interest in sustainability can go there and kind of hear what others are working on. We've done the same thing with the housing roundtables recently. And so this could be, we could, at some point, part of our engagement plan could be to post something like that and make sure that it's publicized to pick up anything. Yeah.
Any question, Megan, sorry.
Yeah.
I think I read in the bridge about someone, was a Concord or somebody have interest in the land for battery storage or solar storage or something like that, or is there, did I read that about, is a need for town?
I can't speak to that right now. I'll circle back.
Yeah, I was just, like, is there any, we talked about the sewer wastewater treatment, we talked about Concord Light, but is there any other town departments that are sort of eyeing that site?
Oh, sure. I mean, there are a lot of needs in town, and we are working to, and there's also a lot of opportunity. And so I think, we're trying to think about what, we had a great study done in 2020 for town facilities specifically.
Right.
And looking at our existing buildings, are they needing a program or not? And a lot of them are not, for some of our programs, including, the public safety building, Concord Public Works. And so we are looking at, thinking about some of these properties that could come online and see what could make sense, but, I think that would be part of the conversation of a, visioning process for the site, but, you know, like I would say to any stakeholder, like I think that the full visioning process should move forward, and I would, at least speaking for myself, I would be advocating for any like real carve out at this point without the full discussion. I think that's where we are.
Thank you.
One other item was the commissioner mentioned having Megan, your team, your staff interact with his to start to, I think, draft initial kind of scopes of responsibility. Is that something that's already on your team's radar, or is that was that the first time?
No, we meet every other week,
Okay.
and Paul's still on here. We haven't gotten to, right now, it's still Department of Corrections facility. And so the scope drafting is occurring in DCAM's office with their legal team, I think right now focused on engineering. But we haven't gotten to the next phase, and I think we make a good point about like, well, what are all of the scopes that need to be developed for, there must be a checklist somewhere, you know, this isn't something we do every day, but others do.
That's right.
So I think in our next couple conversations, we're hoping to. This was so helpful today at the high level, and this is kind of where I've been for a little while now, but now it is pivoting to like, what are we doing with this money? What are these next steps that who are the contractors that we need to engage? So I feel like we're getting closer to that turning point, and I think it'll be really helpful, you know, if the board considers having Paul and Abby in on the 8th, because they're preparing kind of like a next level down presentation to start to talk about that.
Perfect. Paul, is that something that's reasonable for the 8th?
Yeah, that's as Megan says, conversations we've started having with her team and are continuing to dive into over the coming weeks, and look forward to taking that next step down one level with you all in 2 weeks. On that, I do have to drop, so I appreciate the time tonight.
Yeah. Diane Proctor, I see your hands up.
Thank you, Mark. Sorry. Thank you, Mark. I just want to say that the degree to which the league can be supportive, we'd be happy to. First Fridays and other events that are filmed by the Minuteman Media Network and made available. Hundreds of people watch those videos and lots of people attend. And as you know, the first MCI event was actually held by the league, and it gathered a very large group. So the degree to which we can facilitate this, I love your roundtable ideas and everything else, but you might want to have many meetings or very specialized meetings, and we can try to work our schedule around needs that you have. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, I know we only have a few minutes left. There's a draft in the agenda for future meetings. It's quite high level, and I think that we've touched on many of the topics that would be brought forward in future meetings, including site visits. Maybe a similar discussion to our DCAM one today with MassDOT. This notion that Diane just teed up around community engagement, right, and the different channels and forums to do that. And then any other, there were several other that I think meetings will cover in terms of kind of agenda items, including the urban land development as an example that should probably be nearer than further. Any other hot button or priority topics that we want to make sure that we have on our agenda flag for upcoming? Mary?
I think we want to talk about the current zoning and.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we might be able to pull that into next time.
Yeah, that, you might want to have that as an executive session. We can think about that.
Okay.
What's the deadline in the fall for having that on the town docket?
If we missed it, means this special town meeting you're talking about?
For next year?
Oh, the beginning of January, I think is when the warrant closes.
Yeah, it's gonna be later than that.
Yeah.
It's gonna be the beginning of
Oh,
February. Yeah, so we have a little more time
Yeah.
than usual.
If you remember that.
Yeah. All right, well, our next meeting will be July 8th, 12 o'clock. Right here, I will be remote, I'm on vacation, but I'll dial in. So excuse me. But otherwise, move to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're right. Thank you, everyone.